Hello, everyone. I'm Everton de Oliveira, and I'm here from the Groundwater Project. A Groundwater Project is a project that you should be part of it. It's a great project to bring groundwater knowledge to anyone who's interested for free. And we have very, very important names, very great figures. You're gonna meet another one today, right? Participating in this project is going to be the largest project in groundwater ever for book production. So we have today here with us Dr. Herbert Wang. He's an emeritus professor of geosciences at the University of Wisconsin, Madison. And he produced a book, Groundwater Storage in Confined Aquifer, a very important topic, and we have the pleasure to meet him here today. Okay, so Professor, I'll drop the doctor and the professor if you don't mind, and I'll call you by Herb, if that's okay with you, all right? So please, welcome and make an introduction to our audience, please.
Thank you very much, Everton. I'm really pleased to be here. The book on storage in confined aquifers just happened to be the favorite lecture I would give when I taught the basic course on hydrogeology. My own background involves both geomechanics and hydrogeology, and the concept of storage fits right at their intersection.
Oh, that's very good. Well, yours is a welcome book on principles and concepts, and it focuses on a somewhat less tangible subject to students, to people that arrive first into this world of groundwater. On a simple exercise, how would you explain a confined aquifer for, say, a layperson?
I agree with you that the fact that groundwater is in the subsurface and is hidden from our view does make it more important to understand the concepts. A confined aquifer is an aquifer, meaning a water-bearing layer, that has built up pressure in it because it is recharged at higher elevation and is sandwiched or trapped between impermeable layers. Let's say you have a garden hose with a shutoff nozzle on one end. And then you've run the hose from the faucet for a while, and now you close the nozzle on the end. And let's say I point my hose at you, and the faucet is off at the wall, but I'm pointing my hose at you, and would you back away? Because what happens if I open the nozzle? All right, you back away because you get a pretty good spurt from the nozzle. But suppose my hose were made up of solid steel hollow rod. And I do the same thing. I'm watering my garden with my steel hose, and then I shut the nozzle, and then I turn it off at the wall. Now I point my hose at you, and I open the nozzle, and only a small trickle of water is likely to come out. And so aquifers, confined aquifers, behave in the same way, that if I have a lot of aquifer compressibility or elasticity, like the rubber in my garden hose, then I can release a lot of water from storage. But if the hose is rigid, made of steel, then the only water I get is from the compressibility of the water itself, which is pretty small, and I just get a small trickle out of the end of my hose. So in a nutshell, this is the kind of behavior that was understood over a period of many decades.
That's quite interesting. So what you're saying for someone who doesn't know is that aquifers, we can compress aquifer. Actually, not we can compress. Nature does it, right? That's his nature. So aquifer are not rigid. Is that why we have that, right? Very good. You have an important point for those who study groundwater. You say in the book that the storage is arguably the second in importance only to Darcy's law in its centrality of hydrogeology. What is storage again? you just mentioned, and why do you think this? I used to think, from my PhD, I used to think that capillarity was the second most important thing. And then you come up with storage. Now we have a discussion here.
When we talk about unsaturated rock or soil, I will agree with you. But here we're talking about a confined aquifer that is fully saturated, so capillarity does not enter into the picture.
Exactly.
Yes, we digress here, but when I used to talk about capillarity, I would say that before the oil cartels, the biggest oil cartel was the Texas Railway Commission, because of capillarity was so important to understanding the production of oil. Anyway,
Exactly.
The solution to groundwater problems always involves two concepts: transmissivity and storativity. In other words, how fast does it move and where does the water come from? The two concepts are intertwined with the boundary conditions. We should never forget the importance in solving any groundwater problem of being aware of our boundary conditions. So if my well is next to a big lake and the aquifer is permeable, then my aquifer water comes from the lake. But if the recharge to the aquifer is much slower than what I extract, then I'm taking water from storage. To use a bank metaphor, if I have a big trust fund, my lake, then I can withdraw at a fast rate. But if it isn't replenished fast enough, I'm taking from my savings, that is, from my money storage. In formal terms, the groundwater equation contains a permeability term and a storage term. You know, I could have said that the two are co-equal in importance, but maybe storage is second after Darcy's law, which is what defines the transmissibility or the hydraulic conductivity, is because storage is not involved in steady state conditions when replenishment equals withdrawal.
Well, when it comes to your book, and I had such a pleasure in reading that, and I was talking somehow about the story with John Brenhoff and Lenny Konikow 2 weeks ago, and John worked with ties, and then your description of the arrival to the concepts ran like a movie, which I loved it. Right? Could you try to make a spoken trailer of the Dakota Aquifer Saga, just to tease the readers of your book, please?
My trailer, in fact, the whole historical development depends very much on being interested in U.S. culture and the U.S. history of the settlement of the West. So with that caveat, all right, so here's my setup scene. There was a series of books by Laura Ingalls Wilder, the Little House on the Prairie series. So she lived in South Dakota, which is where the Dakota sandstone saga takes place. So I'd open with a scene from Little House on the Prairie following the drought of 1886 to 1889. And the artesian pressure of the Woonsocket well shooting 150 feet into the sky will be in the backdrop. And settlers will be drilling 10,000 wells in the decade following the drought. So that's scene one. Then in scene two, we flash forward a decade and watch that water jet dwindle. And we see worried settlers seeing their wells lose pressure and worried that they're going to lose their farm. Scene three, we're going to go back now to John Wesley Powell, the first director of the United States Geological Survey, and who is also historically well known for being the leader of the 1869 expedition to the Grand Canyon. And he's testifying before Congress in 1890, and Congress wants to hear there's plenty of water for settlement of the Dakota Territory, but Powell is worried whether there would be enough water to satisfy the settlers' irrigation needs. So we're going to hear him testify. Then we're going to move to scene 4. Oscar Meinzer of the United States Geological Survey will calculate that 5/6 of the water being extracted isn't replenished by recharge from the Black Hills on the western side of the state. Now comes scene 5. We see C.V. Tice and Meinzer clashing over whether or not Tice can hire a mathematician to help him with solving the problem of unsteady flow to a well. Now, there was discrimination at, or bias perhaps, at the USGS about why would you want to hire a Jewish mathematician? And in Tice's own biography, when he was an undergraduate at the University of Cincinnati, there was an honorary fraternity in which he, along with others, rejected an applicant named Clarence Lubin. Lubin was Jewish. Lubin later became a mathematics professor at the University of Cincinnati. And that is the person that Tice sent a letter with his inquiry about a comparable heat conduction problem. And Tice, to his credit, admits that he made a big mistake, that he voted based on bias rather than on knowledge. So this is written up by Tice himself, which is where I get this story. And so he turned to Lubin, who told him that his analogous problem of taking heat out of a horizontal plate was already solved and well known in the mathematics literature. So that would be my trailer. I'd have the settlers worried. I'd show some of the politics between the USGS and Congress, and I would show some of the historical personality clashes that took place.
Well, that's quite interesting for sure. I love to read that in the book, and of course, for you who's watching this chat, this is just a trailer because the whole story is there. You have to get to the end so you learn hydrogeology and history at the same time, which is very, very nice. Well, thank you for this historical aspect. It was so good. So the book in itself, it's good only for that, if not for groundwater. That would be an interest, a part of the groundwater concept. One of the aspects that always raise interest in is the effect of the train over a confined aquifer. Could you tell us a little bit about that? And if that's something in the book about that as well, please.
The explanation for why water well levels respond to a passing train has a straightforward explanation. A train passing over an aquifer compresses it, squeezing the water so the water level goes up in the well. And because the head rises in this region, it flows away while the train sits at the station. Now, when the train leaves the station, the ground springs back up and water levels drop because the pore space has expanded. Now this becomes a region of lower water pressure and the surrounding water flows back and fills it back up. The person who provided the first scientific record of this was a professor at the University of Wisconsin. His name was F.H. King, and he observed this phenomenon at the railway station in Whitewater, Wisconsin, which is about 40 miles from Madison. And he even points out that the effect is greater when a heavy freight train comes into the station than when a light passenger train comes into the station. So we see a relationship between the load and the water level response.
Yeah, that's quite interesting. We have friends here just by, just by checking. So when we're doing some pump test and you have all the sensors, right? We close to a railroad. So we wait until a train comes by and we can just check that information. That's quite interesting, that information. So well, in your book, you mentioned that Tice and Jacobs both were fundamental, and as we know, to hydrogeology. Heat conduction and from scratch. What's the difference between both? Would there be Jacobs without Tice at that time? Because Jacobs developed the equation from scratch, as you mentioned, right? But would he be able to do that by himself? That's the question. Well, maybe there's not an answer, but you may know.
Let me respond to your question by going back to that analogy with heat flow that Tice used in his own conception of the pumping of a well. The analogy of specific storage and specific heat applies in the sense that you can solve problems in heat transport without understanding the molecular aspects of heat capacity, explaining why water and ice have different specific heats. It's based on the number of degrees of freedom of the molecular behavior inside the material. The analogy is that Jacob provided the micromechanical understanding of specific storage in the same way that Dulong and Petit did for the specific heat of elements. In fact, it's my belief that even today, understanding the molecular basis for the specific heat of liquids is still a theoretical problem. But that doesn't keep one from doing engineering problems of heat transport if you've just made a direct measurement of what the specific heat is, not so-called calculating it from scratch. So there is value in being able to estimate the storage from the porosity and the compressibility of water and the compressibility of the aquifer. But when you do a pump test and use the Tice solution, you come up with an estimate of the storage parameter without resorting to that micromechanical understanding in the same way you can do a heat transport problem without resorting to a molecular theory.
Okay, okay. So again, would that be possible? Would Jacobs start the idea by himself? That would be the question. What was the need at the time?
I would say definitely that the concept of storage was there, and Jacob provided that physical and mechanical understanding. He and Tice were very close collaborators at the USGS. Yeah. And so the historical order shows that Jacob's work followed that of Tice.
Yes, that's what I thought. Well, is there a happy end for this whole history? How is the science today with the possibility of using sensors and have massive data from aquifers? Do you think we can improve our science, or it's all there? No basic study for the concepts is necessary today. What do you think?
I think that the importance to society for understanding the basis of storage in confined aquifers is the concept of mining groundwater. And today now we have the concepts of sustainable yield or safe yield so that we can manage our confined aquifer resource, particularly for irrigation, in a manner that is sustainable or safe. In terms of using modern day sensor technology for managing our aquifers, recent research is using satellite geodesy and seismology for monitoring aquifer levels, and I find this very exciting. I'm particularly fond of a technology called distributed acoustic sensing, in which fiber optic cable is used as the ground motion sensor, so that you can essentially place a seismometer every couple of meters over distances of tens, if not hundreds of kilometers. But that's the subject of a whole nother interview. And so I've appreciated the
Well, but
opportunity to try and share.
You're teasing your audience again. People are eager to know what's next, what's coming on in the horizon for themselves. So they read the basics, but they keep an eye on the future. And that's why you're here. You know what's going on. That's very good. Well, I'm asking you that. We have, you mentioned sustainability, and it's an important topic. We know groundwater is being extracted, at a much higher rate than it is being replaced. What is your view on that? In essence, how can we manage groundwater? How can we manage groundwater in the future to make sure the future generations would profit from this, precious resource?
That is a very difficult question, but I think what is important is, first of all, to appreciate the question, and then to understand that groundwater is an extremely valuable resource, that in many situations it is being mined, which means that it is not being replaced, and that when we export agricultural crops, that we are in many situations exporting water. And to appreciate that that tomato or that almond has behind it a very important groundwater management issue behind it.
Yeah, I agree. I've been studying it, and I have student that you just knew, Bruna. We worked on the subject. That's why I sort of skewed the discussion towards that. I think for us, like hydrogeologists, I like the idea of this water export that goes with products to act as a warning. But we know that we can manage water to go back to where it was before, and we can manage water as using it and having it again in good quality. We just need let's say, the awareness of the people, of politicians and people in general, so we could do that. So in essence, I'm not very fond of using the virtual water, or I would say water footprint, because it seems like the water is lost. Like you send water and you're not gonna get it again, right? So my idea was more in a sense that we are able with science to understand aquifers, to study them properly and use it properly. Is that what you think?
Yes, I agree very much that before those political decisions should be made, they must be rooted in a fundamental understanding of the behavior of that aquifer in terms of its capacity.
Yes, very good, very good. So all we're talking about, if we see, there was not on the script, so I'm pushing you harder because I'm enjoying this conversation. I'm sorry about that. The story that you mentioned in your book, the movie that you told there, happened about 100 years ago, a bit earlier for the first ones, but it's about 100, 120 years ago. And we had a huge improvement in science in all these years, right? And groundwater in general. My question is, what about your feeling of the groundwater science in the future? What do you expect? Do you think it's going to play a better role than we have up to now? Because it's a very important asset, right? What do you think?
So the important aspects of groundwater is appreciating that the groundwater does not respect our political borders. within a country, we have state boundaries. Between countries, often rivers and hence the groundwater divides are also need to be managed as a unit, but we have different political entities. And I think that actually is the biggest issue that we face as a society, is that we can have the scientific understanding, and then we need to resolve how we, in whatever the word fair means, adjudicate the relationship of that resource to the different interests of people who share the resource.
Yeah, that's a good point. So maybe we need a more interaction between lawyers that makes law, in a sense, people that write the laws, and hydrogeologists, so we can produce more sound legislation related to the use of groundwater, because apparently most of the science is there already, right?
For a while, I taught some classes in environmental justice, and this issue of transnational boundaries and water justice. There is a literature in the law journals over these issues.
Oh, that's very good. That's very good. Okay, so I'm pushing you a bit longer than you expected. It was a very nice talking to you, and I understand your book, well, for me, was a pleasure to read. It's a well presented material for a initial tough topic from when I studied in the books previously. This is very nicely and lightly presented. So congratulations for a job well done. And I'm sure your book's going to be a great success. Thank you very much for participating in our project. Thank you, Herb.
Thank you. I've appreciated this opportunity to try and share my perspective with readers of the Groundwater Project ebooks.
All right. Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye.